Well, good evening, Life Groups Live. It's good to be with you guys again tonight, and wanted to take a minute just to first and foremost say thank you guys for praying last week for our sister Charlotte Combs. The immediate response that we heard of what God did, providing the relief and really the miracle that he did in her life last week, followed right on the heels of all of us taking the time to gather together and pray. And I just want to encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing. Keep loving each other like you're loving each other. Keep praying for each other the way that you have been, because God answers those prayers. All right, guys, let's get into the Word tonight. I want us to look at one of the points that I preached this morning and really dig into that. And that being, we see the Son's unswerving, or tonight I'm going to call it unbending faithfulness to his Father. And I want us to kind of look at it from the question of how. How did he have such an unbending faithfulness? Why did he have such an unbending faithfulness? You know, we're quick to say because he was Jesus. And there's obviously a great degree of truth about that. However, we need to understand that when Jesus became man, he became man. He did take upon himself the limitations that you and I have. He really was tempted in all points like we were, just yet without sin. And so a concept that's really important to understand about Jesus when he came to earth as a man was that what he did as a man. And therefore, we as mere men and women, we are capable of doing the same things that Jesus did. Now, this is true emotionally with what we're talking about tonight, and having an inner decision, an inner strength to be faithful to God through the hard times. It's true as well with miracles. You know, we talk about Jesus walking on water, but so did Peter. Peter literally walked on water, just like Jesus did. We talk about Jesus raising people from the dead. So did Paul and Peter. Jesus gave sight to the blind. So did the disciples. Jesus cast out demons. So did the disciples. My point in saying all that is that what Jesus did, we too are capable of doing when we operate by the same principles of faith that he did. And so I want us tonight to look at this concept of unbending faithfulness. How was Jesus so faithful even in the face of all that he faced, being abandoned, the awful way that he died, the physical pain, the emotional torment, all of it, being abandoned by the Father as we studied this morning? How did Jesus stay faithful through all of that? What we want to do is learn from his example and follow his example. And I want to deal with what I believe are the three primary reasons Jesus had an unbending faithfulness. And I will submit tonight that I truly believe that if we are equally committed to these three principles, we too can have an unbending faithfulness even in the face of extreme trials. So number one tonight, the first thing that you have got to have unbending faithfulness is you must count the cost. Unbending faithfulness requires counting the cost. Jesus had counted the cost. He knew ahead of time what it would ultimately cost him to do the Father's will. And just like all of us as people, we kind of have an idea of what that cost is going to look like. And when it comes upon us, no doubt about it, sometimes it's difficult, and it's more difficult than we assumed. And we might find ourselves just like Jesus, saying, Father, if there's any other way, can you make a different path? But when the answer is no, the reality is we knew ahead of time what the cost would be. Jesus told his disciples repeatedly that he was going to be falsely accused, that he was going to be betrayed, that he was ultimately going to be crucified. He told them all of this because he knew. And when Jesus made the decision to be faithful to the Father to the end, no matter the cost, he had done exactly that. He had counted the cost. I want you to look, it's a very similar concept. Jesus himself taught about this in his ministry. And let's look at the parable or story that he told in Luke chapter 14, verses 28 through 33. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. Look what Jesus says is the conclusion. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. You know, in renouncing all that he has, what Jesus is simply telling us is that my life is no longer mine. It doesn't belong to me. Jesus saw his life that way, and he knew that in doing the Father's will, there were times that it would cost him tremendously, even his own life, and he had counted that cost before ever making the decision. I really do believe that one of the reasons so many Christians falter in the time of temptation or trial is because they never did count the cost. Some of them were never even told there was a cost. They should have read their Bibles. Jesus clearly taught there was a cost. I just read it. And he says, if you want to be my disciple, you have to take up your cross. Yeah, it will cost you something. So brothers and sisters, the first thing that we have to do, I mean, the absolute requirement, you want to be a person who lives with an unbending faithfulness to God, you better count the cost of what that means, so that when the cost comes due, you are ready. You've already considered it. You already knew it was going to, what type of, whether it be persecution, mockery, pain, division in the family, division with friends. You had already considered these things and knew that one day it might come to this, and you were ready for it. You had counted the cost. That's number one. First requirement that I believe is absolutely crucial to living the Christian faith with an unbending faithfulness to God. Number two, not only do we count the cost, but unbending faithfulness requires focus on the reward. Focus on the reward. You know, if all that you look at is the cost, it's going to be very difficult to push yourself through it. But Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2, it says this: looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. I really believe that joy is a big word that encompasses a lot of things. I would say the two major of them being what followed, that he is seated at the right hand of the Father. He knew that was before him. And there was a certain element of just hungering for that moment, knowing that the cost, knowing that this faithfulness would ultimately lead to a greater joy in being next to the Father. I also believe that joy was knowing that he would win you and I into the family, that he would secure for his Father, for himself, for the kingdom of God. He would secure a multitude of people who could now become the sons and daughters of God. It's one of the very first words that Jesus used to describe his apostles after he rose from the dead. He called them brothers. You know, he had never used that term before until he had risen from the dead. He called them brothers. We looked at this a few weeks back about him not being ashamed to call us brothers and sisters. I believe that too, brothers and sisters, is part of the joy that was set before him. And so when we are in that face of temptation and trial, if we want to have an unshakable, unbreakable, unbending faithfulness to God, not only do we need to count the cost before we're facing it, we need to know what it's going to cost us, but I would say even more importantly, we need to know there is a reward for it on the other side. And we must stay focused on the reward that is to come instead of focusing on the temporary pain and suffering that may come because of our faithfulness to God. So you need to count the cost. Number 2, you need to be focused on the joy that is to come. And then number 3 tonight, unbending faithfulness requires deep love for the Father. Deep love for the Father. Of all the motivating factors, deep love for his Father was by far the most superior reason that Jesus had an unbending faithfulness to God. Yes, he counted the costs, and you better believe it's necessary. And yes, he understood and was focused on the joy that was set before him. And brothers and sisters, that's necessary. But this third point is unparalleled in its importance. The reason for ultimately all of it was that Jesus loved the Father. He wanted to please his Father. And when we love God with a deep and true love, I mean love him, we will be willing to be faithful to him even in the hard times, in the face of temptation, in the face of fear, in the face of trials, because we love him. You know, most of you may relate to this type of love if you're married with your spouse. There are a lot of things that you might put up with, but you will not put up with somebody attacking your spouse. You will stand no matter what, even if it ends the relationship. Sometimes it ends relationships with parents. Sometimes it ends relationships with other people in the family, friends, co-workers. But we love our spouse. I love my wife. And because of that, I'm committed to her above the rest of you, above the rest of the people of this world. And there's nothing that anybody else could do to get me out of fear of what they might do to me or say about me. There's nothing they could get me to do that would in any way cause me to bring harm to her or shame to her, because, simply put, I love her. And so I'm willing to lay down my life and my rights and anything that would come my way for her. Jesus loved his Father with that deep of a love. Brothers and sisters, I am so convinced that if there was anything that we could do that would bring revival to the church, it is us as God's people falling in love with our God. Not just learning about him, not facts up here, but building this deep and intimate relationship with him where we truly love him. We love him with our life. We will not serve a God that we do not love. This is the reality. That's why so many people are professing Christians, but they really aren't true servants of God. They're not obedient in their faith. They're not following God, because we won't serve a God. We won't obey a God that we don't love. Listen to me when I say this. We will not love a God that we don't know. At the end of the day, this is all about knowing God. That's what I do as a teacher, is I try to help people know God. That's what you guys should be doing with each other, is trying to help one another truly know God. That's what you should be doing in your own personal lives, is hungering to know God, seeking Him. He promised, "You will find me," He said, "when you search for me with all your heart." He wants to be known. And so the secret to loving Him like Jesus did is knowing Him like Jesus did. Spending time with Him like Jesus did. Putting yourself in places where you must depend upon Him like Jesus did. Being faithful to Him where you can wait and see the reward of it like Jesus did. And in all of this, we learn to know Him more and more and more. And this is the truth about God for every soul who has ever grown to know Him deeper. This is the truth. The more you know Him, the more you do love Him. And it's in that true and deep and sincere love that we will find the power, the strength, the motivation, whatever you want to call it, to endure the hardships with an unbending faithfulness to this God who we love. Brothers and sisters, I hope that encourages you tonight. I hope that you have a hunger to know God more. I hope you encourage one another to know God more. I hope you see the importance of knowing Him so that you might love Him more. God bless. Have a good night.